The Germans went through this interesting exercise a few years ago surrounding Leitkultur. Leitkultur was a term that was invented by a Syrian living in Berlin, teaching in Berlin, Bassam Tibi, who has also participated in some Nexus conferences in the past. And what Leitkultur was, in Tibi's definition, was precisely this open, post-Enlightenment universal identity. And he said that any immigrant coming to Europe ought to share in this set of cultural values, and if you don't share them, if you believe in the union of religion and state, for example, you simply cannot be part of that broader society. The German Christian Democrats floated this idea very briefly until they were shouted down mostly from people on the left saying that they were being racist and that they were raising this old specter of German nationalism and an exclusive kind of, racially based identity. Now, I think the Christian Democrats are making another try at this, now calling it a demokratische Leitkultur, to make clear that it's not simply the old kind of German nationalism. But it illustrates at least a serious attempt to think through and define, the content of what a modern liberal national identity ought to be. There are other things from the American experience that I think might be of possible relevance. One thing is, and this is a comment that I've heard from a lot of Americans living in Europe, that in the whole post-war period, there's been a kind of cynicism about institutions and a decay of institutional life and the general ritual matrix in which most institutions exist all across the continent, so that the institution of marriage, a lot of Europeans don't bother to get married in a church anymore. They simply live together and so forth. It's a kind of attitude towards authority that said, well, we're beyond all of these traditional kinds of symbols. And it's very interesting if you contrast that to the United States, that Americans are full of all these corny rituals. I mean, when we take a new immigrant into the United States, it's presided over by a judge. Usually, some political official shows up at the ceremony. There's a color guard, and people salute the flag, and they cite the oath of citizenship. And it's reported in the newspapers, and people are very proud of the fact that, they came from Guatemala, but now they have their American citizenship. And that kind of ritualization, it's the sort of thing that creates and binds communities, has really deteriorated across the board all over Europe. And it's something to rethink, perhaps, that cynicism or the fact that people in Europe believe that they were beyond this kind of self-conscious formation of social institutions is perhaps something that needs to be rethought. Final issue has to do with, as I said, the labor market. The European labor market, it seems to me, is very unfriendly to the integration of new immigrants. If people could get a job and show that they were useful members of a society rather than living on welfare, their path towards integration, I think, would be much easier, because I, like many other Americans, believe that ultimately dignity comes through that kind of work and contribution, even if it is low paid. And I think there are plenty of other reasons for liberalizing European labor markets, but this is a particularly critical one. I'm going to say very briefly a couple words about political correctness. I think that the big problem in Europe up till now has been a stifling political correctness in talking about this whole nexus of issues surrounding identity, culture, nationalism, and immigration. The German experience with Leitkultur is a perfect example of that. I believe that Bassam Tibi's concept of Leitkultur was actually a very forward-thinking and good idea, but it simply was not, you could not discuss it in Germany for fear of being labeled part of the far right and a restoration of an older form of German nationalism. And therefore, the center-right parties that should have been the ones driving a debate on this were not willing to raise the issue. They were intimidated from doing that. Now, here in Holland, you've moved from political correctness to something different, in your debate over the past few months. But at least you've made you've crossed that barrier.